I haunted them, and they never knew it. Mama, Papa, and my little brother Jacob. They always looked right through me, for 2 years, never detecting even the slightest sign of my presence. Have you ever felt the bitter outrage that boils inside of you when you're being ignored? Well, what happened during those years was even worse than being ignored. At least if someone ignores you, they still know you're there. My very existence remained unacknowledged, and the madness of my situation fed into itself daily. I couldn't even leave the area around Papa's wheat farm. Some unknown force kept me bound to that place, and an opportunity to exit had never presented itself. I didn't even know what an exit for me would look like. With no outlet to express my frustration and nobody to communicate with, my ire and ill will grew, soon consuming the entirety of my thoughts. If you don't yet understand, I'm dead. For the 2 years immediately following my death, and before I came to this place I am now, I was the one and only ghost on my family's farm. Perhaps, in hearing the story of my life and demise, you might learn how to avoid some of the mistakes I made. So please pay attention, because there's a lesson in here somewhere, but I'll leave it for you to figure out what it is. It was 1950, and Papa's wheat farm had been doing well. The war had brought an economic boom, which continued well after the soldiers came home from the battlefields of Europe and the islands of the Pacific. I was 12 years old, and my brother Jacob was 7. He was fun to pick on, and it was my enjoyable hobby to get him into trouble as much as I could. I loved to intentionally leave messes, like spilled milk, that would invariably get him blamed for. Sometimes I'd complain to Mama that he was bothering me when he wasn't really doing anything wrong at all. It felt good to see him get scolded and run off to his room, crying his denials. I'd laugh when that happened, and I'd embrace those incidents in my mind, because those were the moments when I was the good child, the one who wasn't getting into trouble. But the overall best thing about having Jacob around is that he would sleepwalk. When this happened, he was almost always in a highly suggestible state. Since his bedtime was an hour earlier than mine, I had many opportunities to sneak up to his bedroom and put suggestions into his mind. If left alone when sleepwalking, he probably would have never left the upstairs part of the house, but at least half the time I could get him to do nearly whatever I asked him. I'd tell him things like, "Jacob, take your pillow outside and lay down on the grass." Then I'd laugh to myself as he actually attempted to leave the house with his pillow in hand. Mama and Papa were aware of his problem and kept a close eye on him, but they had no idea about the manner in which I was exacerbating the situation. It was only after several incidents that one night Papa finally overheard me giving Jacob some sleepwalking instructions. "Jacob, go throw this over the banister," I told him as I placed his favorite toy truck in his hands. We were standing right outside of his bedroom. I turned around and saw that Papa was upstairs too. Clearly he'd heard me. I jumped back in surprise, unable to think of anything to say. After several awkward moments, I ran off to my bedroom without speaking a single word. I felt shame and guilt, but most of all, I just didn't want to get into trouble. I could hear Papa walk Jacob to his room and put him to bed. Through the wall, I could hear him speak some comforting words. When Papa came to my room a few minutes later, I pretended to be asleep. He stood in my doorway for a moment. He probably knew I was really awake. He stepped inside, covered me with a blanket, and left. I spent the next hour awake in bed, wondering and worrying about what would happen the next day. Papa finally got his chance to talk to me while I was eating breakfast the next morning. He entered the dining room and sat down at the table. He spoke in his always calm but firm voice. "Mary, what were you telling your brother last night about the toy truck?" "Nothing, Papa. Why?" "Now, Mary, please don't lie to me. I took a break from the fields just to come talk to you. Please tell me what you said." I felt my annoyance and anger rising up. I wasn't going to let Papa blame Jacob's sleeping problem on me. "It's not my fault he sleepwalks. My voice came out louder than I'd intended. Papa sighed, then took a moment to contemplate before speaking again. Nobody said it was your fault, but I need to know what's going on with you two. I didn't want to admit what I'd been doing. To admit that I'd been giving Jacob suggestions while he walked in his sleep meant that everything could come unraveled. Papa and Mama would know how I'd been treating him. I thought that they would finally figure out all my secret misbehaviors. The idea of everything coming down at once overwhelmed me. I'd always been quick to anger, a trait that I'd inherited from neither my mother nor my father. In that regard, I was unique within my family. Now I could feel the fury coming up. There was a small part of me that tried to stop the upcoming eruption, but the anger couldn't be sequestered. "Leave me alone," I screamed. "I hate you, Papa, and I hate Mama too." At that moment, I really did feel a hatred towards Papa and Mama. Why did Papa have to question me? Why did he have to pry? And Mama always agreed with him. She was in on this too. Papa was stunned and could say nothing. I'd shown my anger and frustration many times before, but I'd never spoken to him like that in the past. I could see that he was more hurt than mad. That didn't matter to me. It was Wednesday, a school day. I got up, grabbed my 2 school books, and ran out of the house crying, heading down the driveway toward the distant dirt road, and then to the school. Normally, I would have walked with Jacob, but there was no way I was going to wait for the brat that morning. I got halfway there before I stopped. I didn't feel like going to school. I'd stopped crying, but the thought of sitting in class while an adult lectured me didn't appeal to me that morning. I'd never skipped school before, but even having the thought was a liberating feeling. I walked down to a nearby pond and relaxed under a tree, picking dandelions and blowing their tops off. When I tired of that, I tore some pages out of my books and spent some time folding them into paper airplanes. Then I walked along the shore of the pond, getting my shoes muddy and wet. After a couple of hours, finally bored and still upset, I decided to walk back to the farm. I figured when Jacob showed up at school without me, the principal would have called my house to make sure everything was okay. So Mama and Papa probably knew I was missing, and I didn't care about that. I cut slowly through the fields, heading towards the house, but with no real goal in mind. It was May, the time of year when the wheat that had been planted in winter was harvested, and everyone was even busier than usual. Reaching the edge of a field, I saw Peter, one of the farm hands, was harvesting the wheat atop Papa's big combine. Usually it was Papa who drove the machines, but not right then. Maybe he was out looking for me. The thought of him frantically searching made me laugh. Peter drove the combine up to the grain truck and began emptying his load of wheat. Peter had been in the army, and Papa had hired him right after he came back from the war. Papa said that all the soldiers who charged into enemy fire on that beach like Peter had deserved to have a job waiting for them when they got home. Peter had 2 bullet wounds in his left arm to prove his bravery, and they could be seen whenever he wore short sleeves. He never really talked about how he got them, though. Mama never trusted Peter. "He's irresponsible and he drinks too much," she'd argue with Papa. But Papa wouldn't hear it. Sometimes, late at night, I could hear Peter cry out from the bunkhouse. Bad dreams, I guess. The other hands would yell at him to shut up, and he would. Usually, Peter was good-natured, but there was a part of him that always seemed a little distant, and sometimes he snapped at the other farm hands with little provocation. However, he was always nice to me and Jacob, and seemed to enjoy our company. Peter was one of my favorite people on the farm. Still feeling angry and bored, I saw that I had a unique opportunity. The big machines, especially the combine, were fascinating to me. I knew Papa would never in a million years let me ride one of the machines with him, but Peter, with his friendly demeanor towards me, I knew there was a chance he'd let me. "Hi, Peter." Peter turned and looked at me. "Hey there, Mary," he smiled. "Shouldn't you be in school?" "Teacher got sick and let us all go home." It was the best lie I could think of. Then, trying hard to mask my still simmering anger, I continued. "I'm glad I ran into you, Peter. I wasn't expecting you to be here." Peter chuckled and grinned. "Well, you never know where I'll pop up. Maybe we're just meant to run into each other today. My grandfather always told me there's no such thing as accidentally running into somebody." It seemed that Peter was starting in on one of his philosophical conversations, and while I usually liked hearing him talk, at that moment I only had one goal in mind. With a fake smile, I made a request. "Hey, Peter, do you think I could ride up there with you?" "Don't ask me that, Mary. You know I can't let you up here." Peter's smile wavered a bit. "Please, Peter, I'll hold on real tight. You're the only one who's nice to me." I used a slightly whiny voice, and I made my eyes appear watery by squeezing my lids together tightly for a moment. "Please, pretty please." Peter paused and wiped the sweat off his brow. He took a small flask out of his pocket, opened it, and took a quick sip before considering the request. "Well, fine, get up here and hold on, but don't let your daddy see you up here. We'll both be in big trouble." The truth is, I was somewhat hoping Papa would see us. Not because I wanted Peter to get into trouble, but because I wanted to see Papa get mad. I was already in trouble anyway. I climbed up on top of the machine and swung my legs over the metal crossbars that provided the only protection to whoever might be in the open cab of the combine. Peter revved up the engine and drove slowly forward. As he drove, the wheat was pushed slowly beneath the machine by the big spinning wheel in front. The crop was cut, threshed, and separated all at once by this giant mechanical beast. Rather than trying to enjoy the ride, I scanned the field looking for any sign of Papa. Peter was sitting in the only seat, so I awkwardly squatted in the small space next to him, holding on tight to the horizontal bar. Peter looked and smiled. "Hang on now, we're gonna turn around." Peter reached the end of the row, and I redoubled my grip on the bar, but my attention was focused on trying to spot Papa. As the combine swung in a big arc, its wheels slipped into a large rut, jolting the whole machine. My wet shoes slipped from under me, and though I tried to hold on, my sweaty palms easily betrayed me. I slid under the protective crossbar and landed atop the giant spinning reel. I saw the panic on Peter's face as I slipped, but he was too slow to react and couldn't stop the machine in time. My scream was cut short as the reel carried me over and then under the giant combine. The machine carried forward and overtook me, and its gnashing, unforgiving cutters quickly ended my life. Here's something you probably don't know about being dead. Your feelings become more simplified, and it's incredibly difficult to have more than one emotion at a time. With practice, the dead can learn to maintain control over their thoughts, but that may take years. Watching life move on without me, I couldn't help but feel anything but anger. I don't know if I can explain it satisfactorily. The hollow feeling a lonely ghost gets while watching the living, watching, hating, and eventually despising them. There's no sleep when you're dead, no break you can use to reset yourself or your thoughts. There's no point at which you wake up feeling better. Those moments simply don't exist. Sometimes strong memories are triggered by sights, sounds, and even smells, and your emotions may go into an entirely different direction. But normally, your feelings are like a freight train, unstoppable and headed only one way. 2 years alone, yet surrounded by my now despised family. I spoke to them daily. I told them I hated them, but they never heard me. "I hope you died, Jacob." It felt good to say it to him after I saw that my wooden dollhouse was now in his room, stuffed full of his toy cars. "Go to hell, Mama. I'd say as she sat wistfully in her rocking chair looking out the window towards the wheat fields. Papa, everything is your fault. I hate you. I'd say that to him every day. And Peter, I loathed him the most of all. Of course, he had to leave the farm after what he'd done to me. He spent 8 months in jail for his negligence. I heard Mama talking on the phone, telling a friend how he'd gotten off easy on account of his war record and the fact that his father had once been an important man in the county. Even though Peter wasn't there, I'd speak to him too. Why do you have to be such a drunk idiot, Peter? I watched as holidays passed by, all celebrated without me. Seasons cycled through, and the world around me began to change. Jacob got bigger, Papa hired new farm hands, Mama took up quilting again. Me, I stayed the same. It was May of 1952 when something different, something amazing finally happened. Someone heard me speak. I was in the house with my family, spewing my hate towards everyone, yet to no one person in particular. Jacob had gone to his room to sleep, and Mama and Papa were listening to a radio show. I was upstairs in my old bedroom, looking at the blank walls. I hope this place burns down. Why? Came a curious voice from behind me. I turned and found Jacob standing right next to me. For once he was looking at me instead of through me. His eyes were open, but with the blank look on his face. I'd seen that look before. Jacob was sleepwalking, which was something he hadn't done in a while. My surprise momentarily subdued me, and I could say nothing in response. Why do you hope the house burns down, Mary? You heard me, Jacob? Yes, Mary, I heard you. His voice was monotonous. For a moment, a very brief moment, I felt a tiny bit of relief and happiness. But the anger wouldn't relinquish the domination over me, and quickly returned to the forefront. Trying to see if Jacob would still be susceptible to my suggestions, and allowing my hate to guide me, I spoke. Jacob, there's something I want you to do. Keeping my voice calm, I continued. Follow me to the end of the hall. Jacob was a good listener, and together we moved down the hallway. Then, with minimal effort, I encouraged Jacob to go find Mama and Papa. They were in the kitchen and didn't notice Jacob as he slowly and silently walked up behind them. Tell them that you hate them, Jacob. Jacob had a confused look on his face. His mouth opened as if to speak, but then closed again. Say it, Jacob, if you want me to be happy. Jacob finally spoke to Mama and Papa. I hate you. They both turned around, surprised. I spoke another instruction to Jacob, telling him what to say, and he complied. Both of you are stupid fucking bastards. Mama gasped at hearing her little son say such a horrible thing. I didn't even know what all those words meant, but I'd heard the farmhands use them when they thought nobody else was listening to them. Jacob, sweetie, what's wrong? Mama looked closely and seemed to be able to tell that Jacob was asleep. She looked back at Papa, who nodded his understanding. He had a concerned look on his face. Mama guided Jacob back upstairs and then sat with him while he settled comfortably into his bed. She sang a quiet song to help him relax. I stayed the night in his room, waiting to see if he'd get up again, but he slept through until sunup. The next morning, I watched as Jacob sat eating his breakfast at the kitchen table. He was reading from a book called 1001 Riddles for Children while he ate. Mama was cleaning the dishes. Hey, Mama, what's full of holes yet still holds water? Mama pondered the riddle for a moment. I'm not sure, Angel. A sponge. Jacob laughed loud as he said it. Mama laughed too. That's a good riddle, Jacob. Then Mama took a more serious tone. Jacob, do you remember coming downstairs last night after you went to bed? Nope, Jacob said as he thumbed through his book looking for more riddles. Mama didn't say anything else about it, but it was clear she was troubled by the incident. Over the next 2 weeks, Jacob had 3 more sleepwalking incidents. Each time, I was able to exert my control over him, and each time I had him go into Mama and Papa's bedroom and express my hate to them. I could tell they were getting more concerned, almost scared, by these nighttime visits. Jacob seemed unaffected by these experiences, and was always happy in the morning. Soon, though, I became bored with this activity, and sought out something else I could do with Jacob. But with my single-track mind, new ideas were difficult to create. One afternoon, I overheard Mama talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her exasperated tone caught my attention. "Can you believe it? He came to the farm yesterday. He wanted to talk to us, but one of the farmhands stopped him, told him to leave. They said he's camped under the trestle." Mama paused as the voice on the other end spoke. Then she continued, "Well, yeah, but we can't kick him out of there. That's not our land." Mama listened for a moment, then spoke again. "Well, they said he wanted to apologize, but he was drunk. He's a real mess, apparently." I could hear the amount of bitterness coming through my Mama's tone, and I could see tears at the corner of her eyes. Mama continued with the conversation, but I quickly grew tired of listening and left the kitchen. An hour later, I figured out who she'd been talking about when I saw Papa outside, arguing with another man. I looked closer. It was Peter he was arguing with. I could hear them both clearly. "Please, Mr. Ford," Peter cried. "I just want to tell her I'm sorry." Pleading tears streamed down his face, and he struggled to stand upright. Papa's words were clear and deliberate. "You need to go. I don't want you to come back. You have no reason to be here. Go away, and if I hear about you camping out around here anymore, I'm gonna let the sheriff know." Peter stood silently, then gave the only apology he could give. "I'm sorry for what I did. Please tell the missus for me. I'm sorry." He turned and slowly walked towards the road, defeated. Papa stood in place, watching as he grew smaller in the distance. Finally, Papa turned and, looking at the staring farmhands who'd collected nearby, told them to get back to work. Peter had come to apologize for the second time in 2 days, but Papa had refused to listen to him and wouldn't let him talk to Mama. Peter had failed at his task, but his presence had succeeded in accomplishing something else, reminding me of my own death. And that's when I got a new idea. I had died as a child. Why shouldn't Jacob die as a child too?